Good evening to everyone here in the room and everyone that is watching from the comfort of your offices or homes to this debate that we are organizing together with the European Internet Forum, and I very much want to thank them for providing this framework on a theme that is still very important here in Brussels, and not only. I think literally there is every day at least one debate on AI. At least yesterday, for example, I attended 4. And that is a testimony to how important this discussion is, how important the effort that we're making at European level to legislate AI, but certainly also the effort that is being done at a more global level to find convergence, in terms of how you govern the development of artificial intelligence, what kind of signposting you put for creating the rules of the game in what is and will be certainly the main driver for societal and economic transformation in the decades to come. To accompany me in tonight's discussion, and I want to thank them very much, we have 4 speakers, 4 panelists. I'm going to introduce them to you right now. To my right, Kilian Gross, the head of Unit AI Policy Development and Coordination, basically the authors of the proposal from the commissions, the mothers and fathers of this text. To my left, and I very much want to thank Nicole for coming all the way from Washington for this, Nicole Francis Reynolds, the VP and Head of Global Government Relations for ServiceNow. Thank you very much, Nicole, for being with us. Then Koen Kobbert, Senior Manager, Quality Standards and Regulations at Philips. And online with us, thank you very much, Miguel, for being available. Miguel Valle del Olmo, Deputy Director General for Artificial Intelligence and Digital Enabling Technologies with the Spanish Ministry of Economic Affairs and Digital Transformation. Most likely, and I'm already revealing a bit of what I wanted to tell you at the beginning, most likely the ones who will close this file on behalf of the Council as the soon-to-come Spanish presidency. But that, in a way, opens up the few things that I wanted to tell you at the beginning in my intro before I give the floor to the panelists who will go a bit more in detail on the topic of today, which is AI governance in Europe, how to make it work. My contribution very much links to where we are right now in Parliament. Those of you that are watching closely what is going on in Brussels on this file will know that yesterday the Council has adopted its common position on the file, which means that they are ready on their side. They are ready for trilogues, for negotiating with us. Us in Parliament are a little bit slower, given also the very complex structure we have agreed to have on this file. Again, a testimony of how politically important this file is. You know, we have 2 committees that are co-responsible for the negotiations of this file. One committee which I represent, and also IMCO committee, and a whole plethora of other committees that are contributing to the conversation. That means that the discussions on our side in Parliament have been a little bit slower, but I think that out of that thorough discussion, something good will come out, because it is an opportunity to actually listen to all possible perspectives and political positions on each possible topic, and at the end of that process, I hope we'll have a text that will allow us to then engage with the Council in what I hope to be trilogues that will lead to a decision, as I was saying at the start, by the end of 2023. So our calendar now in Parliament looks at February, March as the end date for the negotiations and a position of Parliament, hopefully in the plenary in March. That means that by end of March we'll be ready to start negotiating. If I am to venture a bit of a perspective on the negotiations that are upcoming with the Council, and looking at the position that was adopted yesterday on many of the important political points, and looking also at where we are with the discussions in Parliament, I see, if not convergence, at least certainly a room to discuss, to have constructive negotiations so that we will actually be able to finish by the end of 23, as I said, under the Spanish presidency. There will be issues where we will have ideological debates, I'm convinced, and if you are interested then in the Q&A, I can go more into detail on that. But overall, I remain optimistic that in this mandate we will have an AI Act adopted. Now, the topic of today is supposed to be governance, and it's not by accident that we have chosen this topic, because I particularly think that governance and the way we're going to set up the governance for the implementation and enforcement as AI is going to be key for how we will manage to bring that balance between a human-centric approach to AI, one that is led by our concerns, legitimate concerns about the ethical elements brought about by AI, but also on the other side to continue to stimulate innovation, to allow AI to actually play its course in our economic development. And at least in the discussions in Parliament, we are always very mindful to keep that balance between the human-centric and the innovation-centric perspective that this text has to have. And from my point of view, and that is a point of view that now I can say is shared by a majority of political groups in Parliament, governance is fundamental, because it is going to be either an enabler for a uniform implementation and enforcement of the text that will be playing out in terms of giving companies a level playing field at the level of the European market or not. So where we are today, we have moved from the initial proposal of the Commission, sorry about that, Killian, by adding a European layer of responsibility, both in terms of monitoring and overseeing implementation, also in terms of enforcement. We are yet to hammer out the details as to how exactly the enforcement is going to be done, how much will be left to the Commission, how much will be taken on by the AI board that is created already in the proposal of the Commission, but which we are enforcing quite significantly in the text that we are negotiating right now in Parliament. So we are giving additional competencies to this board, including the competencies to play the referee between national authorities in the situations where in 2 or more different member states there will be divergence in interpretation of how the rules will apply. And that, again, in our minds, will help in bringing uniformity to the way the regulation will be implemented at the level of the entire EU market. And also, again, a very important discussion on enforcement, which we are yet to close entirely. Again, we're still playing with whether there will be an enforcement that will be left for the Commission, or whether it will be the board that will also take on full enforcement powers. But in any case, we are already in our discussions recognizing that there has to be a layer of enforcement at European level. There will be a threshold fashioned a bit to what we have already used in the DSA. So part of the enforcement will be left up to a certain threshold, will be left to national authorities. That's the logic that we are applying in the text that we're working on right now. And then from then, that threshold upwards, a threshold that will be determined by the number of users that will be affected by a particular infringement of the regulation. That from that threshold onward, again, it will be a European level enforcement that will play out. I repeat, either by Commission or by the newly created AI board. We are yet to go into the details as to how exactly the board will be supported by a secretariat, how big, how small, and what will be the distinction of responsibilities between the board and the secretariat. But these are just details. Again, the overall governance, and that's an important thing, is going to be a European-wide governance. That also plays with another element which I consider to be fundamental in ensuring that balance between innovation and human centricity of the regulation, which is sandboxes. And that was an additional argument for why a European level governance is necessary. We are promoting in the text the rollout of sandboxes as much as possible, as granular as possible, from municipal level to regional level to national level, mandatory in every member state. And we do that because we are convinced that with this regulation, without the possibility, without creating spaces where companies can safely engage and make mistakes and test together with the regulator by their side, it's going to be difficult to ensure that level playing field, and also to help the implementation of the new rules. So because we believe so much in sandboxes, we have asked the question, okay, but what happens with the best practices, with the very vital feedback that will come out of that interaction between companies and regulators. And that was an additional argument why we thought, well, if you would only leave national governance, then again, that important, vital information, that best practice, that feedback will remain at national level. And therefore, again, this was an additional argument why a EU-level governance would be able to extract, coordinate, bring up to the benefit of all of that information coming out of the sandboxes everywhere they are, and then use them either in the decisions that the board would take, but also very importantly in the adaptations that will be done to the legislation. And that's a very important element. Everyone asks this question: how do we ensure the future proofing of the text? How do we ensure that the text will stay constantly in sync with the evolution of this technology, which by its nature is going to be constantly leaping forward? And the answer is, again, in the way we are going to set up the governance. Why? Because, again, with this information, very important information that will come out of the sandboxes, and with having a governance where also stakeholders are structurally present at the decision-making table, and that's also an important element of novelty in the proposal that we will make on governance. There's going to be an advisory forum composed of stakeholders, though that actually bring the reality of AI into the political discussion, into the political conversation. So with that construction, we can make sure that the adaptations that will be put forward for the Commission to take either to Annex 3 or to other parts that will remain flexible in the text, those changes, those adaptations will be done in accordance, again, with what happens in reality, with what is being brought from the direct interaction on the ground between those developing AI, those uptaking AI, and the regulators. One last point that I want to make, which in our logic in European Parliament is fundamental, and that is convergence. Again, I say it all the time in every event on AI that I go to. Yes, Brussels effect. Yes, we are the first ones putting forward horizontal legislation on AI, but no, we cannot be alone in doing that. So we have to strive for convergence. We have to constantly be mindful of what happens and how the conversation evolves in the US, in other like-minded partners, and we will have in terms of how we'll be approaching the standardization that will follow the implementation of these texts, we will have to strive to have standards that will be relevant globally. And there is work that will happen once the regulation will be in place. We are also tweaking the proposal of the Commission in that respect, in that we are moving the standardization work towards standard-setting bodies, hoping also that those bodies will be working with global-level standard-setting bodies so that, again, the standards that will be developed will be not done in isolation, only relevant here for the European market, but will be something that will be finding equivalence in standard setting work that is being done either in the US or, again, at a more global standard setting bodies. As you well know, NTTC has just ended 2 days ago. AI is also an integral part of the discussion in NTTC. If we look at the results of the discussion at the beginning of this week, it looks still good. AI is still there, very clearly anchored, both at political level, but also in terms of how the administrations on both sides are committed to find convergence, to find common work, to find common projects. The two projects were, again, validated, affirmed, worked together on AI and labor market, worked together on finding common approach on how to measure biases in AI. And all that, for me, to me, it means that we will remain committed to work together in pushing this file forward.
It's a big pleasure to be here with you and to discuss my favorite topic. And I was asked not to speak too long because I can speak, of course, very long about AI. But it's a bit difficult for me this task, because Dragos has this incredible advantage towards me that he knows things which nobody else knows. And what I know is probably common good since yesterday, because the Council has adopted the general approach. You can all read it. You know our proposal, and Dragos indeed can tell you things which nobody else knows. So I beg me pardon that I'm being therefore a little bit less less interesting, but perhaps I can highlight nevertheless some thoughts which we have looking at the general approach which have been adopted tomorrow, and then how we see the further development. We fully concur with what Dragoș said. We think there is a lot of common ground, which makes us optimistic, notwithstanding the 3,300 amendments and, of course, quite the long discussions we had in the Council, because we see that on the fundamental concepts of the AI Act, there is quite some consent. So to have a risk-based approach, to have a horizontal legislation, to use standards, to use requirements for high-risk AI applications, and to take concepts over from product legislation with which we have a lot of experience and a lot of good experience from the past. And as well with the underlying rationale of the proposal to find a good balance between innovation and regulation. So I think there we all agree, and it's a lot about now how to bring this into practice to fine-tune this, but there is not, and this is not completely obvious in such an innovative proposal, there's not any divergence about the main direction of this and how the architecture of the act should look like. There's a lot of discussion about very important points. I don't want to hide this, and it will take as well a bit of time. But we have, I think, a lot of common ground where we can start the discussion. If you look now a bit at the Council text, which has now been adopted since yesterday, so we have this just famous general approach, which means that the Council gets ready for the trilogues, and we hope and we're optimistic that the Parliament will join soon, so that we can in 2023, relatively soon, still in the first quarter, perhaps at the end or the beginning of the second quarter, we can start then to do the trilogues and then to have time to negotiate these important points. Just some words on what Dragoș has already mentioned. On governance, you may remember the Commission had started with a proposal which basically gave a lot of implementing powers to the member states, because they normally implement or enforce the product legislation. They have a lot of authorities in place. They have market surveillance authorities, they have notified bodies, there are structures, and we wanted to make the maximum use of these structures. And we foresaw on European level a board where basically these national regulators would come together and would ensure consistency between these national structures, so to allow a uniform application of the rules throughout Europe. The Council, and I think this is a bit similar what you explained when you talked about the thinking in the Parliament, has as well reinforced the role of the board. So we see in the general approach that the board got much more powers. It will have more things to do, more tasks. It will, in particular, it will really start to help market surveillance authorities and notifying authorities in case of conflicts. It will give recommendations on the delegated acts and the implementing acts, which are a key point in order to keep the system updated. It will work on the guidance to assist the work of the market surveillance authorities, and it will have powers like cross-border investigations, or it will be responsible as well for international matters. So the board, if you look already at the Council, you see there is the list of the tasks and the competences of the board already there is significantly extended. That's the first lesson we see when we compare the text with the initial proposal. The second is that we see the composition has changed. There is now much more flexibility for member states whom to send. We had originally proposed there should be always the market surveillance authorities. Now member states are flexible whom to send. This is the one side. On the other side, it's already prescribed that there should be 3 standing subcommittees, namely one for stakeholders, one for market surveillance authorities, and one for notifying authorities. So it will be a much more comprehensive system already than the one we had originally foreseen. If we then take a step further and we look a bit at enforcement, so how will the system be enforced? And here we are really grateful for as well the work in the Council and in the Parliament, because we all agree we need to get it right. It's good to have a law on paper, but it's really important to have a law which is enforced, because otherwise it doesn't bring any benefit. It just creates bureaucracy, and it doesn't help anybody. So as well here the Council has worked on this. They keep the system in the Council of the decentralized market surveillance authorities. They rely on the existing scheme, but they strengthen the capacities. So the Council really looked about capacity building, because I think there was a certain worry among the member states that, and this is not, I think, isolated just to the AI Act, but it's a bit broader, that this new digital rule book, as we call it, may overstretch sometimes national capacities to deal with these complex matters. And this is, I think, the AI Act is one part of this. Therefore, there was a call on what could we do to support member states, in particular smaller member states, to be able to supervise these complex systems and really develop a level of competence which is needed to discuss with developers of very innovative and very complex AI systems. And what they propose here is that there should be a union testing facility, at least one or even several, so that would be kind of a lab on union level which could help the market surveillance authorities in their tasks, so they could turn to that lab if they don't have the expertise themselves, and this lab would carry out for them then basically the checks of complex systems. Another, I think, innovative and interesting idea is this idea in the Council of the pool of experts. So there should be a pool of experts available to which member states should refer in case they want to have advice the market surveillance authorities in a given case. There could be a reimbursement model that is a bit secondary, but the key thing is there should be kind of an expertise should be provided and be on standby in case this is needed. And I'm very grateful that you mentioned that, because it's very, very important. There was a lot of work done in the Council on the sandboxes, and we just started with our Spanish friends. We had a workshop on sandboxes, and this really creates a lot of interest, and I think there's a lot of momentum. And and here we see that we foresaw this concept of a regulatory sandbox already in the original proposal. So that basically a protected area where in particular small companies should come together and should try to develop their system under some supervision, which would help them to be compliant by design, to be compliant from the beginning and not to occur extra costs after they've run through the development. This has been taken up by the presidencies, by the different ones. The French have as well worked a lot on this, and they've really extended the text. So now if you look at the sandboxes, it's much more elaborated, it's much more detailed. There are more objectives. One, you mentioned that in your European structure, is regulatory learning is now one of these, the objectives of the sandbox. So it goes a bit beyond what we had initially thought, just to help the individual companies, but as well to help the authorities to understand better the needs and the problems. Then there was a lot of discussion about the interplay with existing sandboxes, because these sandboxes are not just in isolation, because there are sometimes already sandboxes on data protection or sandboxes on financing, in particular fintechs. So how to cooperate with this. Then the Council has added, I think that's another important element, they have added no really derogation from rules, but they've added a kind of an immunity. So you would not get administrative fines if you're in good faith in the sandbox. So that should give you some kind of guarantee. And they've added, I think that's very interesting, the real world testing, because you can even test your systems output of the sandbox if there's a plan and there's a competent authority supervising you, and the affected persons have given you an informed consent, and that should help you to improve your data set, because after all you need a good data set, and we should not here basically make it impossible to have a good data set, which we need to overcome the requirements. So therefore to allow extended testing, I think, is exactly what we need. And that should allow, and they have kept this provision on further processing of data. And one thing which I think is very interesting in this framework of implementation is that and this I think is a bit innovative, that we already start to think and to prepare the implementation before the act is adopted, just to be ready, because we know it's very complex. So we work already with the European standardization organizations on standards. We will issue a mandate for the first round of standards, which may then further on need to be adapted, but we want to start this work already. There's already a group, JTC 21, thinking about these standards. That's one thing. Another super important initiative is, of course, the Spanish initiative on regulatory sandboxes, and I guess Miguel will get a bit more into detail, I presume, which is very, very interesting, because it will help us to get experience with sandboxes and to get experience how to apply and to implement the regulation, and that will help us as well to prepare these guidance, which we then have to come up once we start. So that's another thing, and then of course we will start to reflect on the union testing facility. So we will from our side do everything that once the regulation is adopted and then the transitional period has expired, and that the system is then in place to allow a smooth and effective and uniform implementation of this regulation. Perhaps I'll stop here, and then I'm very happy to take your questions and to continue the discussion.
On behalf of our CEO, Bill McDermott, and over 20,000 employees around the world, which includes 3,000 Europeans, one of which is right here, Fabrizio Porino, who I'm just thankful to be with. We want to say thank you. Thank you for allowing us to be here and to be part of this critically important discussion. For those of you who may not know, ServiceNow is a multinational company that is headquartered in Santa Clara, California, again with 20,000 employees around the world. Our platform, we are a platform company, and our platform is used by over 85% of the Fortune 500 companies, over 270 governments around the world, and in Europe, 30 countries within Europe. Our software modernizes processes and operations for companies, governments, and organizations so that employees can operate their programs seamlessly, safely, more efficiently, and so that customers are able to use the programs, the software efficiently, and in your case, Dragos, so that citizens can have their services delivered in a much more efficient way. We all know that the digital transformation tailwinds seem to be much stronger than the challenging economic crosswinds that we are experiencing. And as such, technology should be embedded and be part of the fabric of corporations, the structure, and how governments operate. As we have all seen during COVID, that our phones and iPads and laptops were critically important to us, so that we could access our vaccine cards, so that we could apply, people could apply, those who were unemployed, unfortunately, could apply for benefits, and for companies who enabled their employees to work remotely were able to do so, which really put ServiceNow at the forefront because of the power and the strength of our platform. We appreciate the work that the Commission and the Parliament, the Council and the TTC is doing, because we know that this is a critically important topic, and it's a complex topic, one that cannot be rushed through. And so we applaud what you are doing to take your time and to be deliberate in the development of this. With regard to AI and ServiceNow, our platform is used as a developer of, or a provider rather, of general purpose software. And so we take that seriously. We absolutely believe in the providing of responsible AI, and we believe through this collaboration that this partnership can help us and help you as you continue down this path to finality of this file. Our thoughts about governance are the following. We believe that global harmonization is critically important, as we are seeing that the TTC and the work that you are doing within your member states is critically important, and we hope that that will continue so that for compliance purposes from the industry, from the consumer perspective, that we will all be aware of what those guidelines, the policies, the regulations are, and we can adhere to them responsibly. We believe that innovation is critically important. Artificial intelligence is on the cutting edge, right? It is cutting edge technology that can continue to help build and strengthen our global economy. And again, it has to be used responsibly, has to be developed, provided for, and the use cases must illustrate responsible behavior. As such, you talked about the liability provisions through the AI Liability Directive and how that will be executed. And because of that, the definitions that are going to be clearly defined, general purpose and high risk, should be developed very, very carefully and deliberately so that there are no unintended consequences to those industries that are developing and providing this for the benefit of your constituents and for customers and people around the world. And so I mentioned harmonization, collaboration, innovation, preparation. We know that artificial intelligence requires coding and developing and, again, providing. And so we would love to partner with you so that the workforce has the digital skills required so that they are prepared. We have a phenomenal program called NextGen, where we are working with universities around the world to develop these skills and helping them secure internships and good-paying jobs. Our CEO, Bill McDermott, recently announced a program called Rise Up because we know that the development of apps are important. Millions and millions of apps will need to be developed over the next 5 to 10 years. And so we want 1 million people to be able to learn our platform and to build upon it. And as you mentioned, sandboxes, test apps, the development of applications out so that when we are hungry, we can use an app to get the food that we need. When we do want to work from home, we have the flexibility to do that, given all of the balancing needs that we have. And representation, as you mentioned, ensuring that the EU's member states are at the table, because there are different viewpoints around AI and how it gets implemented and how it is impacted by the citizens in all of the member states. It's important. Representation matters. And then finally, just evaluation. As you mentioned, the sandboxes, it is important to allow industries like ours to test and use open source, again, responsibly, so that we know what works, what the best practices are, what the best practices aren't. And we believe that if these tenets are adhered to, that we will move toward harmonization, global harmonization, so that artificial intelligence can be a benefit to businesses, governments, consumers, and again, to the global economy. So thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for allowing us to be here today.
Good evening, everybody. So I'm Koen Kopbaert. I have a background in safety engineering, and I worked for over 2 decades now with software and AI in medical devices. And my vision, and that of the medical device sector, is of an environment where safe and qualitative, trustworthy AI systems are capable to improve healthcare and patient outcomes. And to have that environment, we need a robust regulatory framework. And robustness means that we need legal clarity. Legal clarity both within the AI Act, but also between the AI Act and sectorial legislation, such as the medical device regulation, because the medical device regulation already covers most aspects of AI. The AI Act in its current form, however, risks over-regulation and misalignment with the sectorial legislation. And if that is not addressed, it will lead to legal uncertainty and adversely impact patient access to safe and performant AI-enabled medical devices, and negatively impact the willingness to invest in those devices in the EU. By all means, we should avoid what is happening today under the medical device regulation, where we have supply issues for certain medical devices in the union market due to the difficulties of implementing the medical device regulation in the union. Patients, healthcare providers, professionals and hospitals, they have now reduced a choice of the medical devices to use, especially for the diagnosis and treatment of rare diseases and minority populations, such as newborn infants. So so the AI Act will come on top of that already very complex regulatory environment and may further worsen the shortage. So if the misalignment is not addressed adequately, and if implementation capacity is insufficient, it will block safe AI-enabled medical devices from entering the union market, which is of course counterproductive to the AI Act's initial goals. And despite the Council's improvements to the text, I still see a big gap between policymakers on the one hand and computer scientists and safety engineers on the other hand. There are various proposed requirements that will actually achieve the opposite of the AI Act's original goals. And I want to illustrate this with an example. The Act that is proposed by the Commission and also the text of the Council reflects an inadequate understanding of data collection activities. it imposes data access requirements that will reduce rather than enhance the robustness of AI systems where minority population data is scarce in the union market. And to illustrate this, take for example, coronary artery disease. If I, as a manufacturer of a device for the diagnosis of treatment of such diseases, want to put such a device on the EU market, under the current medical device regulations, I need to prove that it's safe, that it's effective. I need to consider state of the art. And today this means we need to look for bias, identify bias, and reduce bias as low as possible. Now, part of that medical device regulation requires that we perform a clinical evaluation. So that involves testing, proving scientific validity, analytical performance, clinical performance. And that starts usually with a literature search. And that literature search will tell us that there's a risk of bias, that the biomarker thresholds for certain populations are different. Caucasians have different levels than, for example, Chinese, than Indians, than people of Singapore, Malays. So under our legislation, if you want to put such devices on the EU market, we must consider minority populations in the EU. So we do have people of Chinese descent. We do have people of Indian and Malay descent. We will need to find data to make sure that we test against those populations and that we have sufficient training data sets to test or to train our systems against that. And that's not always straightforward, because data is often within the hospitals, behind security and privacy walls. It's not with the manufacturers. We may be able to do that for Chinese populations. Maybe there's enough data sets there, but maybe not for people of Malay descent. So we have a choice there. Either we exclude our devices from being used on such minority populations, which we prefer not to do, or we train our systems on data sets of such patients. But because we can't find those data sets in the EU, at least not sufficient to prove statistical significance, we're forced to go to Singapore, where we work with Singapore hospitals that have that data sets, hopefully, and where we can train and test our systems against those data sets. They never give us the data sets. The data sets remain behind these security and privacy walls. And we use federated learning systems to be able to train our systems and to make them sufficiently robust. So where's the gap? The gap is here. The AI Act requires that we provide access to full access to the training, the testing, and the validation data sets, which we'll happily give you if we have the data. Often, we don't have the data, because the data is with the hospitals. In this case, it will be with the hospitals in Singapore. So to meet the requirements of the Act, we need to sign a contract with the hospital so that in case a notified body or competent authority knocks on our door, that we're able to give you personal patient data sets from Singapore. And guess what? Are they going to export that? Probably not, because they have data protection regulation in place. So the only choice we have then to meet the AI Act requirements is to not train them on data sets from Malay people, which makes those systems less robust than the systems that we'll be able to sell elsewhere in third countries. And so this is a negative impact of just one example of a requirement in the Act that achieves the opposite of the goals of the Act. And like this, there are more requirements that require more alignment within the Act, with data science, but also with the medical device regulation, because our systems are supposed to be safe and performant and meeting state of the art. And so there would be a conflict here. So how can you fix this? Well, obviously, you can. Why do we have that requirement in the Act? That's probably because we want to have the possibility that a third party, a notified body, checks whether indeed we have managed bias sufficiently and tested for that. But you don't necessarily need to raw data for that. You can use metrics on the quality of your data sets that are used for training and testing. You can check whether the protocols meet state of the art. So that's the way to fix that issue. So in conclusion, alignment with medical device legislation is essential if you want to avoid that European patients become the collateral damage to the AI Act. Because the AI Act has far-reaching consequences and has a lot of impact and will determine how and if AI-enabled medical device technologies will be placed on the union market and reach patients and healthcare providers. Thank you for your attention.
thank you very much, Dragos. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity that you gave me to participate in this session, and Kilian, Dragos, Nicole, and Koen. It's been a pleasure to hear you. So and to listen to you. I've carefully listened to your interventions, and I think that we can get already good conclusions. And yeah, we are ready for the presidency, and I'm really looking forward to see what's the final result on the trilogues. Well, after hearing all the interventions, I would like to address three elements concerning the AI Act and the governance. So the first one is the importance of the coordination processes leading to governance frameworks, of course. Because, well, they are fed at the same time from the first ones. I would also like to talk about the importance of regulatory experimentation. This is something that you have also talked about. And what elements have them shown us up to date. And finally, I will try to focus on the importance of this learning, on future elements, on future steps, on the implementation of the AI Act with maybe, for example, with the case of a general purpose AI system, as an example, taking into account the fact that they are subject to implementing acts in order to be further developed under the latest version of the Council. So, yeah, some things you have said before. Artificial intelligence is a clear paradigm of horizontal technology. Its application it's as varied as the use cases that we can imagine, and this versatility will continue to grow as the technology advances and improves. Moreover, because of its benefits, we will see use cases replicated in different countries. This is very obvious, but therefore, this is leading already to the need of establishing coordination processes, and these processes may include actors such as competent authorities in the same country. And for example, Koen talked about the medical devices regulation. One coordination process could start with the Market Surveillance Authority in the AI Act, and also the Market Surveillance Authority of the Medical Devices Regulation. In Spain, it's the drug agency. And also there are coordination processes among different countries between authorities responsible for protection of fundamental rights, technical and research, private sector, and also standardization bodies. And actually some lines where the working party on artificial intelligence at the OECD is working on common, including various countries, so in the future. So this reality becomes even more evident when it comes to regulating the use of technology at the legal level, and as a part of ensuring minimization of risk while enjoying benefits. So in the AI Act, this coordination appears at various levels, including the definition of a concrete governance framework. And I firmly believe that the European Artificial Intelligence Board is a very effective governance mechanism, where the concerns of the competent national authorities of the different member states can be channeled. And in addition, this body also provides guarantees of participation through subgroups to other actors, okay, such as researchers, experts, civil society organizations, conformity assessment bodies, or standardization organizations. And it will ensure proper harmonization of administrative practices, for example, but also will advise the Commission during the preparation of delegating and implementing acts. I will come back to this later. But one thing I find interesting in this regard is that some elements of the AI Act that are not seen as a governance mechanism itself will be allowed for governance. And one example is the monitoring and the reporting of incidents. The process itself will need to foresee coordination of activities among member states and the Commission, and the experience of this monitoring process will bring some learning to the European AI Board, and also will strengthen all the ties between different actors. So, on a second element concerning the regulatory experimentation, I can focus on our experience with the AI Act sandbox. Kilian said before that we already have a workshop with other member states, and the goal of this sandbox is to test the requirements of the AI regulation. So it's as I sometimes say, it's an inverse sandbox. There's no regulatory framework in place yet, but we have to try on innovative products that might be in place, some future requirements, right? So the aim is to learn about the implementation of the AI Act and try to democratize the knowledge, removing entry barriers to companies of all sizes. We are aware of problems with the medical devices regulation, especially with small companies. And one thing that we want to address is providing them with the tools for gathering the information they need to comply with the requirements. And we really think that by doing this sandbox, this is going to be achieved. And of course, the AI Act itself has inspired us to design the sandbox. But once we have started its implementation, we can say with certainty that some of the AI Act governance framework is correct, because we had to contact with similar actors as those that were in the AI Act. And for example, one very obvious example is that the sandbox could never be successfully launched without the participation of the Data Protection Agency, right? It wouldn't also have the sufficient impact if we didn't give it a translational character. And I will also like to emphasize that our sandbox includes a monitoring phase of high-risk AI systems in order to detect incidents or risk. And valuable information will be obtained regarding undetected incidents or risks in the very similar way that I explained before. And these are seats on the governance, and also it's very valuable in learning to set the AI Act in place. So that is why it's also important for governance in the medium term to push for regulatory sandboxes. They will allow innovative products to be tested, fit in our governance framework, but also may enrich it, especially in cases where sandbox may include actors of other continents. And we were very happy with the improvement in the AI Act writing that Kilian explained before concerning sandboxes. And finally, on the general purpose AI systems, they're included right now in the AI Act, and its inclusion has a purpose because it might be important to be able to set the conditions for all actors, in this case providers, to comply with their obligations. Yet the biggest part of the requirements for the design of these systems are to be established via an implementing act under the version that we are reading from the Council. And in the Spanish AI Act sandbox, we have room for general purpose AI systems. And I have the hope that by testing a group of them, we will be able to have better information to develop such implementing acts. So it's a challenge articulating these governance frameworks, but I really think that the steps set out in the regulation, they mark a path to implement it, and we can establish learning processes to better comply with it. And for now, I think I should stop and see what questions arise from the participants. Thank you.